What's up, you guys? I'm going to show you guys how to make this classic pumping tech deep house type bass. So it's very simple, and it just requires a little bit of audio bouncing and a little bit of processing, but it's quite simple to do, and I have this as my reference. So that's basically the kind of thing we're going for, just a basic pump type of offset bass. So mine's a bit quiet. I can bring it up in the mix a bit more. It's a little bit quiet, but I'm basically going to show you how to make this type of thing from scratch. So the first thing we need to do is go to Synth. It's the most basic patch ever. It's basically every oscillator is going to be a sine wave. A voices, retrig can be on or off. I left it on, and let's see. Actually, hold on, this is supposed to be like that. Okay, so every oscillator will be just like this. We're not going to detune or phase or anything like that. So, oscillator A2 is just like that. And in part B, we're going to add those oscillators again. So if you want, you can just copy and paste, all across every oscillator. And in part B, the envelope is basically what it looks like by default, and only in part A do we bring up the attack to 4.83 or around 4 or 5, kind of right down the middle, so that because we're going to reverse this, so we're going to bounce it and reverse it, so we're going to think of this envelope as kind of backwards. So our release is kind of more our attack, and our attack is kind of now more of a release, so it's kind of like we're using this envelope backwards. And so decay all the way down, sustain all the way up, release is at 1.55, and that's it. We're not doing any effects here, we're not using any of this shit, so we're basically done. If you want to color it more, I mean, that's up to you, but basically this is the most basic version of that. And so once we're done with that, we're going to create an audio track to bounce this to. So we're going to set we're going to get audio from 22 silent, so right here, and we're going to turn this off, solo this, record enable this, and now just press record. And you notice I have this little note at the end that was by itself. That's because when I bounce it, I want to have at least one of them that's by itself, so I can mess around with that one if I want. But in this case, I don't even need to. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click on the sample, we're going to reverse it, and then we're going to line it back up with where it's supposed to be, so offset of the kick, so something like that. And let's zoom out a bit. So now we have basically the bounce form of this, and we don't really even need this anymore. Oh, and if you want, and you probably should, you should use you should sidechain it a little bit to your kicks, or you can add this Kickstart plugin. It costs like 15 bucks. So, I have mine on high chain, 100% for the dry wet, and that's basically it. So, that bounced over. And so now I can get rid of that. I don't need it anymore. And so I have this Ableton rack I created before I made this video to save some time from having to do most of this from scratch. So this is now what is going to beef up this signal here. So it's just basically a compressor with a harsh ratio.
Excuse me, exceed. Low battery. Excuse me, exceed.
Excuse me.
Low battery.
Computer. So I tend to do tutorials when I have low battery for some reason. So anyway, so this chain here, so I was on the compressor, so then the attack is around 2 milliseconds, release is around 27 milliseconds, threshold is around -19, so it's and makeup is on, so it's kind of a harsh, more harsh settings than I typically use. Then we have the Ohmicide, which I'll get to very last, and I threw on a limiter. Then I have a sausage fat now, and I put the color to around 90%, fatness to around 9%, and the gain, I brought that down -6 dB. So this is really here just to color and saturate it a little bit. And then I have that Kickstart plugin again, saying I don't really need it to be there, but this is now the setting of tighter. So get into the Ohmicide. So Ohmicide, why I like Ohmicide and why this is particularly good for these kind of cases is because with distortion, when you add distortion, you lose your low end a bit because distortion is making the waveform. If you've ever looked at waveforms, sine waves are nice and smooth and curvy, and that means it's because it's low frequency. Now when you start to distort things, the waves and the peaks and the oscillation get closer and closer, so that makes for a higher pitch, and distortion does that to waveforms. It makes it more crunched up, it makes it more wavy, and that makes it higher. So Ohmicide is really good for, you can just set the bands that you want and apply little bits of distortion in the frequencies that you want. So that's why I prefer Ohmicide for these kind of things when I'm trying to preserve low end. Now, if you don't have Ohmicide, you can still use other types of distortion, or just apply a little bit amount, or very low dry wet settings if your distortion plugin has that. So we're gonna set band 1 to 300 hertz, band 2 to 3K, around there, and that's it for the bands. Now the shape for band 1 is gonna be 100%, or it's gonna be at sharp, completely on sharp. So fat and sharp is kind of like EQ cues, like narrow and wide. So obviously sharp is kind of narrow, and fat is kind of wide. So that's fat with a PH. And now we're gonna put body up to 100%, gain to plus 3 dB, and this is on soft clip, so standard soft clip. And that's basically it. And I like Ohmicide because you can solo and listen to each of these on its own and do all sorts of crazy stuff, but basically everything I just showed you is all I did to that band. Now band 2, I put the shape between fat and sharp, so it's on 2% fat, body's 100%, and the gain is plus 20 dB or so, and this is on the standard bit crush, so right there. And so it allows me to preserve some low end while still distorting it to get that more edgy type of punch that I kind of like. So if I turn all this off, this is what we have. So it just kind of brings more character to it. So I find that Ohmicide is a pretty heavy CPU plugin compared to a lot of plugins I use. So what I like to do now is that I can either add a new audio track, route it to this one, and bounce this all out, or I could just freeze this. And that's kind of why I like Kickstart that sidechain plugin as well, because if you had a sidechain like a regular compressor routed to a kick, you couldn't freeze it because the routing would conflict. So that's kind of why I like that sidechain plugin as well. So now I'll flan this, which means it's gonna just save the bounce form of that and get rid of the processing. So when you freeze something in a DAW, it's making an audio copy for itself to play back instead of having to go through the processing to play it in real time. So now we're basically done. We have what we want, but I like to do one extra thing in some cases. I don't always do it, but so let's just play what we have anyway before I get into that. So what I like to do sometimes, this is very optional, I like to grab a vocoder, as I like to do with some things, and I like to max out the bands to 40 like always. I like to put this on pitch tracking, so we're gonna kind of add in a oscillator through this, and let's put the depth to around 150%, release to around 50 milliseconds. We're gonna put the low tracking pitch thing to around 50 hertz because this is in the key of G and 50 hertz is a G note. And we're gonna bring this up to around 800, 900, 1K, why not? So let's bring this down. Even though voice is all the way down, we don't need this section on. So I'm not even gonna have to draw anything here, so let's just take a listen. like I said, this is optional, and yeah, usually I like to leave this up, maybe bring it down to around -2 or -4, you know, something that's still going to be in the key of my G minor scale. And in this case it sounds kind of crappy, so but I did it like a few minutes ago before doing this tutorial on pretty much the whole same process I did, but it sounded better, so I don't know. Let's see what I did. This is it right here, so let's copy this one over and just paste it in. So for some reason this one just sounds better, so let me see. The release is kind of the same. Dry width straight down the middle, blah blah blah. So I guess you don't want to have this completely wet. But this one still sounds kind of clippy, peaky, distorted, so this one doesn't. So, you know, the depth isn't as high, release, and you know, so it really depends on how you set it. So that's basically it. This, like I said, this is optional, but you know, we're basically done now. So now you should have something like this. And if it feels kind of lackluster and you needs more gain, you can add a utility plugin to it, compress it some more, things like that. Because you have to keep in mind that these samples like this that are used in these songs, like tech house guys have been sampling from each other for years and years and reprocessing, rebeefing up the same stuff over and over, and it gets bigger, bigger, bigger. So you have to kind of do a little bit of that too, at least with your own original samples, to get it like that. So, you know, what I might do is I might do something like this where I might duplicate this a few times, but do different passes through Silent and, you know, slightly change a few things, add some distortion on some of these layers, group it all together, then bounce that all down into one thing, and it just get bigger and bigger and bigger without, it's kind of like FM, you're just adding more of the same type of ratios to itself, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So if I played all these together, it would be like something like this. Now if we have the vocoders off, of course, because the vocoders are going to add this peak to it. So with the vocoders not there, so you compare that to 1 versus 4, and that's basically it. So I'm probably going to bounce this down and then just delete the reference I brought in to make this, and you know, that's it guys. So thanks for watching, and late.